Last class we focused on the subject of love. But before we could reach that very lofty level of loving your fellow as yourself, we have to learn how to deal with one another on a more basic level. And one of the things that we all have a hard time doing is judging other people favorably. It's probably part of it is because of the culture in which we live, where the media is out to get someone, whether it's a politician, whether it's anyone who's in the news, or just to find criminal activity here or there. It's interesting. People are, this natural weakness of voyeuristic tendency that we want to see the other people's flaws, and maybe it makes us feel better when we look at other people that they're flawed. Oh, I'm not as bad as you. So that makes us feel a little better. But whatever it is that causes it, it's part of human nature. Jewish tradition, classical Judaism, Mussar teachings, and Hasidic teachings focus a lot on how we have to judge other people favorably. The English expression is give someone the benefit of the doubt. And I'll soon analyze the difference between giving someone the benefit of the doubt and judging someone favorably. They're not necessarily synonymous. But the first place where this teaching is expressed explicitly is in a tractate of the Talmud, which is devoted specifically to ethics, and much of Mussar is based on this tractate. It's called Avos, or Avot, which means fathers, or ethics of the fathers. And it's in the beginning, in chapter 1, paragraph 6, it says, judge everyone meritoriously, or judge everyone on the scale of merit. That's the more literal translation. Judge people favorably. But even before that, in the Ethics of the Fathers, the very first teaching of ethics in Jewish classical tradition is be deliberate in judgment, which is intended to serve not only as a guide to a person who's actually a judge, and rabbis in the olden days were judges, first and foremost. That is the main function of a rabbi, by the way. A rabbi, which people say doesn't mean priest, it means teacher. That's only partially true, because in Judaism, the rabbi was a judge, and judges had to be teachers of the next generation of judges. But at any rate, it meant simply to the rabbi who's a judge, be deliberate in judgment. But the commentators say that it wasn't intended just for judges, it's intended for everybody, that we all have to judge others. We're doing that all the time. A person will walk into this room and we'll turn around to look at the person. What are we doing? We're judging the person. Is the person a friend or foe? Is the person here to join the class or to disturb the class? I mean, in whatever situation it is, you're always sizing up other people. That's how we are as human beings. We try to determine what kind of a person is this. Should I befriend this person, or maybe I should keep my distance from this person? So the Mishnah says, Ethics of the Fathers says, be deliberate in judgment. Don't be hasty in determining that this person is not a good person. Be very careful. And the third lesson in Ethics of the Fathers, in chapter 2, don't judge a person until you are in his place. In other words, while you look at a person's behavior and you find it wanting, don't judge the person unfavorably based on what you witnessed, because you're not in that person's place. You don't know that person's challenges. You don't know that person's potential. How do you know how you would have acted had you been in that person's place. So be very careful before you pass judgment on others. And the Talmud says that there's actually a biblical source for this when it says in the Torah, judge your fellow with righteousness. What does that mean, judge your fellow with righteousness? Obviously, if you're a judge, you're not allowed to be corrupt. I mean, that would be self-understood. There's no need to tell you you should judge your fellow with righteousness. So the Talmud says it means that you should go beyond just sticking to the facts. You should always try to see the good in others and judge them favorably. And the Talmud then goes on to say that there's a great reward for this. That if you judge others favorably, God will reward you in the next world. That's where you get your big reward, but you will reap the dividends in this world. Anytime you do something that is beneficial to other people, the reward, while it's primarily stored for you in the future, you will always reap dividends here. If it's a mitzvah that I do between me and God, then there's no guarantee of reward in this world for that, not even the dividends. If you do get a reward, that's fine, but it's not something you have to expect. But if you do something that helps and benefits society, you will reap the dividends in the here and now. And one of the examples is the judging the other person favorably. The Talmud says something even more, that if we judge people favorably, other people, God will judge us favorably. So it's a selfish thing. You want God to judge you favorably? Well, judge others favorably, and you will be judged favorably. And the Talmud tells a few stories, and I'll share one of the stories about how far one should go to judge others favorably. There was a person who's not identified in the Talmud, but later on he is identified, and I'll tell you later who it is. This man was from the south of Israel, and he went north to make him a living, and he worked in a rich man's house for 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, he says, I have to go home to support my family. I mean, we can't even imagine. You go away for 3 years to support your family. But that's the way it worked in those days. You had to become almost like an indentured servant to build up enough money to be able to go home and support your family for the next year. 3 years are up. He worked faithfully for his employer. He earned the living that he was entitled to. And the employer says to him, I'm sorry, I don't have. He says, what about your sheep or your cattle? I don't have. What about your real estate? I don't have. And everything he listed, this is a very wealthy man, and everything he asked for, maybe you could give me some of your money. I don't have any money. I don't have any animals. I don't have any real estate. I don't have any lumber. I don't have anything. And the man says, well, if you don't have, what can I do? And he left in terrible distress because now he has to go home to his family penniless. A while later, the rich man catches up with him. He actually followed him to his home, and he brought him 3 camels laden with all sorts of goods of food and drink and delicacies. And they feasted together, and he paid him all the money he owed him. And then he says to this worker, to this employee, when I told you I didn't have any money, what did you think? Oh, I thought you probably were offered a very good business deal, and you had to invest all your cash, so you had no money. Well, when I told you I had no animals, and you knew that I had a farm full of animals, what did you think? So I thought you probably rented out your animals to other people that they should work with. So you had a contract with other people. And this, he went on to every detail. Then when I told you I had nothing, all my property, all my real estate, I assumed that you probably are a very righteous man and you probably donated all of your wealth to the temple. And the man said, you should be blessed because everything you just said was true. I have a son whose name is Hyrcanus. And my son refuses to learn Torah. And I was so distressed that in an impulsive moment, I said to God, God, if my son will only learn Torah, I'm going to give you everything I own. I'm giving away to charity. And I donated everything to the temple. But then I realized that it was a very rash thing to do. You know, how are you going to survive? So Jewish law says that when you make a vow, it's the only prohibition that you can have it retracted. If you go to 3 rabbis and you can show that if you had known the consequences of your vow, you would never have made the vow, they have the power to annul the vow. And that's what I did, and that's why I'm bringing you all the food and all the money that I owe you. And the Talmud doesn't say who this employee was. We don't know who the employer was, except that his son's name was Hyrcanus. But later, a little bit after the Talmud was written, we probably had a version of the Talmud that identified the person who was the employee was Rabbi Akiva, before he became the great rabbi, when he was just a simple laborer. Now you can understand why Kalba Savua, the wealthiest man in Israel's daughter, fell in love with him, even though he was an illiterate and had really, it seems, no real qualities. If a man was able to give someone the benefit of the doubt under those circumstances, he must have had such a sterling character that he must have been so honest and so pure that he was projecting his own purity and his own righteousness on the other person. That's what we always do, we're projecting. So if you judge people favorably, sometimes it's a projection of your own positive behavior and positive motives. And when you judge people unfavorably, it could be projection. Now, who does this apply to? Maimonides and other commentators say that it doesn't apply to everyone across the board. It only applies to a person whose reputation is unknown. You see someone, you don't know anything about that person. It seems the person did something wrong. You don't know for sure. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Or, if someone is known to you as a righteous person and they do something of questionable ethics, you don't know for sure that they did something wrong, but it looks bad. But it's not 100%. Because you know that they are a good person, a righteous person, give them the benefit of the doubt as well. But if you know that someone is a bad person, a person who has a terrible criminal record, you don't have to give that person the benefit of the doubt. That's what Maimonides writes. Others disagree. Contemporaries and authorities of Mussar, medieval Mussar, disagree, and they say, no, you have to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Which raises a question. If you can give everyone the benefit of the doubt, someone is coming at you with a gun and is ready to harm you, and you're supposed to say, you probably are only kidding. You don't really mean it. So I'm not going to give you my wallet because you don't really want my wallet. Do you really want it? Nah, you're a tzaddik. You're such a nice person. It's not going to work always, and you'll end up, unfortunately, harmed. So how do you protect yourself if you have to give everyone the benefit of the doubt? And certainly, how do you protect other people? You're nice, you want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, you let them into your community, and meanwhile they harm other people. I mean, nowadays there's so much going on with children being abused and molested. You can't just give everyone the benefit of the doubt because it's at the expense of other people's lives. So you have to be very careful over here, and we have to do a little bit of intellectual surgery to try to separate between giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but you also have to protect other people. So there's an expression in the Talmud that says, kabdehu v'chashdehu, honor him and suspect him. That means you truly give the person the benefit of the doubt. You look at the person in a positive vein, but you have to be practical. And practical means that you don't prejudge the person, you just take precautionary measures in case the person, because statistically we know there are some bad people, so you take the right precautionary measures. But don't let it enter your mind that this person is bad and that's why you're taking the precautionary measures. See the positive in that person until such time it would seem when it's obvious that the person did something wrong. And even then, we'll see that there is also a possibility of giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Yes?
Well, I mean, isn't it two different
you don't know if the person is going to commit a bad act. Let's say you
see the bad act, it's in his car.
Oh, once you see the bad act, you have to do things to prevent the bad act and to punish it so it doesn't happen again, whatever measures you have to take. But it shouldn't, your mind should not be focused on looking for the bad in that person. It should be focused on the practical, on protection. It's not easy to do. It's yes?
Is there judgment given on how you determine when you can trust somebody that
Yes, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt and honor them and treat them with respect and dignity, but take the necessary precautions simply because there's a statistical possibility that someone will be harmed. So just like you have to give this person the benefit of the doubt to be fair to that person and to treat that person with dignity, you have to be worried about the dignity and the vulnerability of all the other people. You know, it's not right to be selective and be nice to one person at the expense of other people. But it's not because you're targeting that person and you're focusing inordinately in that person. What you're doing is saying, I'll treat you like a king, but I have to be protective of other people. Now, what is the rationale for this? When you go through the Talmud seems to include this in the category of peace. In other words, in one section of the Talmud, where it discusses these matters, it talks about the value of bringing peace between people, husband and wife, between different people. In a parallel text, the Talmud leaves out the part about peace and includes the part about judging people favorably. So some commentators say that those are really saying the same thing in different words. How do you maintain peaceful relationship with other people? If you're going to constantly judge them unfavorably, you're not going to be able to maintain peace with them, and them with you, and they with you. So it's a matter of promoting the peace. If you analyze this, it seems it may not very well be true. Maybe this person doesn't deserve to be judged favorably, but if you want to promote peace, and people are not perfect, so if you're going to maintain a very strict discipline that I'm only going to have a relationship with perfect people, then of course you're going to have a relationship with yourself. That's if you think you're perfect. If you don't think you're perfect, you're in big trouble. So if you really want to maintain peace, you have to judge people favorably. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But it's not because they are really deserving of that benefit of the doubt, you could argue. It's because it's the healthier way of dealing with things. So obviously, if you take that approach, when you know the person is a criminal, when you know the person is a threat, then of course you have no right to give them the benefit of the doubt because they are the threat to peace, not you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt. So that's a very limited understanding of this trait. Doesn't make it wrong, it's just limited. Another thing that we already referred to earlier, that God treats us measure for measure. If we are charitable, God is charitable to us. If we're cruel, then God forbid, God can be cruel to us. So if we want to be judged favorably by God, we should judge other people favorably. So it's a selfish matter. Again, this is not because it's the right thing necessarily. Doesn't mean it's not the right thing, but it doesn't compel us to say that it's the right thing, but it's the good thing, because it'll be good for us in the end. Judging others favorably will have God judge us. And there's a classic example when King David did what he did with Bathsheba. He was approached by the prophet, and the prophet told him a story about a rich man stealing a lamb from a poor man. And King David was very harsh in his verdict. And the prophet says, well, that's you. And that's what brought his punishment on himself, because he judged someone else harshly. That's how he was judged. But then there's a, yes?
Yeah, I said that reminded me, I also heard that supposedly before you're punished for a given sin, if you
That's right, that's right. Now, the simple explanation, classic explanation, conventional, why we should judge people favorably is because we simply don't know all the facts. Just the reality that if you think you know everything about that person, about what the person did, we don't know all the facts. And one little detail could change everything. And there's a beautiful story that some of you may have heard. There was a rabbi in Hungary, I think it's Slovakia now, was it Bratislava? That's what it's called now. It used to be Pressburg. The rabbi there was Rabbi Shmuel Binyamin Sofer. Maybe you've heard of the Chassam Sofer, who was the greatest rabbi in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This is his son, who was likewise one of the towering scholars. And he had a little convention of rabbis, leading Hungarian rabbis, at the end of a holiday, I think. And they were discussing all issues confronting the Jewish community. And at the end of the more serious part, they had a banquet at the end where they socialized. And the Rabbi Sofer, was in very good spirits, so he said, I want to treat you to something. He takes out a coin, an ancient coin that was ascribed to King David. A very ancient coin. He said, there's no other coin like this. I'd like to show it to everyone. And they passed it around. And then the rabbi said, okay, can I have the coin back? They couldn't find it. Now this is a real precious coin, and the rabbi got very nervous. And he said, everyone should search on the table and the plates, and they couldn't find it. So everyone should search in their pockets. Maybe by accident it fell into someone's pocket, and they searched in their pockets, and they couldn't find it. And someone said, let's search each other's pockets. And an older rabbi gets up and says, no, that's not dignified. We shouldn't do that. Let's just wait another few minutes, searching a little bit more. And everyone's giving him a dirty look. Why is he so afraid to have someone search his pockets? Well, they search for another few minutes, and they still can't find it, and they're ready to start searching each other's pockets. And again, he says, no, we shouldn't be too hasty. Let's wait another 10 minutes and search even better. Maybe it's under the table. And everyone is convinced that this man, an older man, maybe he was a little senile, maybe he was just the temptation of having that coin was so great, he couldn't help it. And everyone is ready to say, no, enough is enough. And then the waiter comes running in from the kitchen. He found the coin. Somehow it fell into one of the plates with the garbage on it, and was brought back into the kitchen. But obviously wasn't stolen. And everyone was relieved. But then someone asked this old rabbi, why were you so hesitant to have people search your pocket? So the rabbi got up and he put his hands in his pocket and he took out an identical coin. He says, when the rabbi said that he had the only coin like it, I had the same coin in my pocket. Now, what would have happened if someone would have put his hand in my pocket and would have taken out this coin? Would there be one person in this room that would have said, I'm innocent? No one would have imagined that I could be innocent. So that tells you, in a very dramatic way, that we don't know all the facts. And we have to recognize that. And that's why we shouldn't judge people unfavorably. One of the modern-day Mussar leaders, Rabbi Finkel, said something interesting. He said, everything has a purpose. Everything. So what about people who have warped logic? It's not very good if you're a doctor and you have warped logic. It's not very good if you're a lawyer and you have warped logic, at least not to your client. It's not very good if you're an engineer and you're designing a bridge and you have warped logic. But so where is warped logic good? He says it's good when you're judging another person. Find the most crazy excuses and justifications to show that the other person is innocent. He says that's where warped logic is a positive thing. Another rationale, conventional wisdom, why we should judge people favorably, Because, you know what? The person is not a good person, did bad things. Okay, that's a given. But why focus on the bad? Focus on the good. Why are you focused on one aspect of that person? Focus on the good part of that person. And therefore, if you focus, we can't, we have a choice in our lives. We can either focus on the negative, we can focus on the positive. Why waste our energy focusing on the negative when we could just as easily focus on the positive? And when you focus on the positive, you will give the person the benefit of the doubt. And if you take the words literally, when it says, it doesn't say judge everyone favorably, it says judge everyone lekaf schus, which means the scale of merit. Imagining that you have a scale with two sides, and there's good on one side, and there's bad on the other side, and the two sides of the scale are balanced evenly. Just give the good side a little nudge. Make it a little bit heavier, so that person will come out looking good. Because God judges us by the majority. Majority not just quantitatively, but qualitatively. So if you focus on the good, you're tipping the scales. No one is saying that the other side isn't heavy. The other side is also heavy. But this side, make it a little heavier. Just look at the good of this person. And then there's another way of putting it, which ties in with what we just said. If you read the Hebrew, it says, Havei done, you shall judge, es kol ha'adam, et kol ha'adam, which is translated every person for meritoriously. But if you really translate it literally, it doesn't say judge every person, it says judge the whole person favorably. Which simply means, why are you looking at one slice of that person's life? One aspect of that person. Look at the entire person. The entire person has good and has bad. So why are you judging the person by just focusing on one narrow aspect of that person's life? There's one other explanation given in one of the, I don't know if he was formerly one of the Mussar authorities, but he was a contemporary of Rabbi Salanter and perhaps influenced by him. And he says that the reason why we should judge people favorably is to prevent us from losing our sense of shame. What does that mean? Why do people desist from doing things that are wrong? Many reasons, but one of the reasons is you're embarrassed to do something that is anti-social, anti-moral, because there are other people who will look down at you. People will say, how could you do that? But when society doesn't look down at you and there's nothing to be embarrassed, nothing will stop you. So if you judge people unfavorably, that means how do you view other people? You view everyone as being immoral, unethical. If you think everyone cheats in their business dealings, what would stop you from cheating? You're not embarrassed anymore. If everyone cheats, why shouldn't I? The only reason you feel that it's wrong to cheat is because everyone is honest, and if I'm going to be the sole cheater, I'm going to look horrible. I'm embarrassed to do that. That's why by judging people favorably, it elevates our sense of propriety, that society has a higher standard of propriety, and I have to meet that standard or else I will look very bad. I'll look wanting. So but if we take all these different explanations, we put them together, one thing emerges, that there's no real reason to judge someone favorably. There's no intrinsic reason. It's either because I'll be judged favorably, that's a selfish reason. It's because don't focus on the negative, focus on the positive, but there is negative. Okay, I'm told not to focus on it. I don't want to lose my sense of embarrassment. I don't know all the facts, but if I did know all the facts, could I then judge people unfavorably? So these are all secondary reasons. And that's where we're going to see how Chassidus gets to the core of it and gives us primary, also some might be secondary, but also primary reasons. That first of all, Chassidus insists that judging people favorably applies to everyone. Everyone. Why? We'll soon see why, but the example is, in the Talmud, there's a rabbi whose name is Yeshua ben Prachya. He happens to be the author of the statement, judge everyone favorably. Why was he the one to give this teaching? Because he had a disciple. Some people believe that the way the Talmud describes this disciple, it's the person upon whom the Christian faith is based. And this disciple, although the years he was before that period, so there's a belief among historians that there's a composite of several people that emerged in the New Testament. But anyhow, this student was a rebel. And he not only rebelled against God, but he caused others to rebel. He enticed others. No, Yeshua ben Prachya's disciple. He caused others to sin. He was what is called a mesis, or mesit, an enticer, a seducer. And the Talmud says that when a person who tries to entice other people to worship idols, when he's put on trial, you're not supposed to look for ways of defending. The defense lawyer could only argue that the person, it's mistaken identity. But once the identity is sure, you don't look for extenuating circumstances legally, because there's no greater sin than trying to get others to sin. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya was very harsh with this student. The Talmud tells the story that he threw the student out. He pushed him out with both hands, figuratively. And then the student came back and said, I'm sorry, I want to make amends. And he threw him out. The third time he came, the student made up his mind. He said, if my teacher accepts me, I'll come back. If not, I'm going to go out all the way and become this most horrible rebel. Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya had the same thing in his mind. If he comes back one more time, I'll accept him, I'll embrace him. Well, Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya was praying, and the student comes back, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya didn't want to interrupt his prayers, so he went like this, as if to say, wait a few minutes. But the student took that to mean, get out, stay out. And he went out all the way. And Rabbi Yeshua blamed himself for allowing that to happen. And the Talmud says we should always learn from this, that you should never push someone away with both hands. Even if you have to discipline someone, you should always discipline them with your left hand, and with your right hand you go like this. Left hand you go like this, and your right hand you go like this. You know, if you're a traffic cop, it's very confusing. Stop, come on. Now remember, there was a demonstration in Brooklyn because of police brutality in the Jewish community. So there was a demonstration in front of the police station, and the liaison was, he was a funny guy, he is a funny guy, and the police tell him, tell the crowd to disperse. We'll take care of everything. So he gets up there and he says in English, everybody leave, go home. Now I'll translate in Yiddish. Bleib da, which means remain here. So again, everyone go home. Then in Yiddish, alle sollen da bleiben. Everyone should remain here. So that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to say, out, or get out with the left hand, and come back in with your right hand. Never use discipline that doesn't involve love as well. That's a lesson that he learned from this. So he is the author, he's the one who says, always judge others favorably, because he did not do it. And he was justified in not doing it because this guy was a real hardened sinner. And the Jewish law says you don't have to look for ways of defending an individual like that. But he realized that he had to go beyond the law and should have shown him a little bit more acceptance and judged him favorably. That's why Rabbi Yeshua was the one who said this. This is one of the things the Rebbe says in one of his commentaries. But it's very instructive because a lot of the teachings that the rabbis themselves said were based on how they judged themselves that they were wanting, and they tried to correct it by teaching the opposite. Then we have the classic stories of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, who's probably the most beloved Hasidic figure in Jewish history. Beloved figure, period. This man, if you were able to draw a caricature of him, it would just be one huge heart with little legs, little hands. He had a great brain as well. He was a very great scholar, but what stands out about him was his love and passion. And there are so many stories about him. The classic story, the Yom Kippur story, is the most famous classic, where he sees this guy brazenly smoking in front of the synagogue on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and he says, "You probably forgot it was Yom Kippur." The man says, "No, I know it is. You probably forgot you're not allowed to smoke." "No, I know you're not allowed to. Your doctor probably told you you have to smoke." "No, I'm healthy. I didn't see any doctors." And he turns to God and says, "God, even when they sin, they're so honest. They're such wonderful people." Then the guy who was wearing his tallis and his tefillin while he was greasing the wheels of his wagon, very disrespectful, not very reverential. And he turns to God and says, "God, look how wonderful your children are. Even when they're greasing their wheels, they pray." Those are the two very famous classics, but there are other very beautiful stories. There's one about someone was sitting in an inn, and he overheard some Jewish people talking about their criminal behavior. "I robbed this person, I robbed that person." And the guy runs to the rabbi and reports. He says, "Oh, how wonderful they are. They're all repenting. They're confessing their sins." He was able to take the most negative thing and turn it into something positive. Then there's the famous story, the 3 court cases. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev was informed that there was a man who died. He was known as the miser of town, and that the Burial Society, which was a communal organization, was demanding that the heirs pay an exorbitant amount for his burial, because they felt he was a miser in his lifetime. At least we'll get his money when he's dead. So the family was very upset. "Why are you charging us more?" So they notified the rabbi about this, and the rabbi said, "Oh, that man passed away. I'm going to the funeral." And everyone was surprised. Why would you want to go to the funeral of the worst man in town, a miser who never parted with a penny for any charitable cause? And later on, the rabbi said that it's because of 3 court cases he had with this man. One court case was a husband and wife were very poor, and the husband says to his wife, "I'm going to have to go to another city. Maybe I'll find some means of employment. There's nothing here in town. I can't make a living." So the wife says, "But how am I going to be supported while you're gone?" So he said, "Oh, go to this rich man. I worked it out, deal with him that he's going to support you because I'm doing business for him." Of course, that was a bubba mice. He made up the story. It was not true. But he needed to leave, so he told his wife the story. So sure enough, at the end of the week, she comes to the office of this rich businessman, and she says to the secretary, "I came to collect my weekly stipend." And the secretary looks at her, "What weekly stipend?" He says, "My husband is working for your boss, and he promised that he's going to..." So there's a little commotion over there. The boss comes out, and here's the story. He says, "Yes, it's true. I did promise to support this woman as long as the husband is not working for me." And for months, she was supported by this guy. The husband finally comes home, and he found a good job. He earned some money, and he's shocked to see that his wife has everything she needed. There was food in the refrigerator. There's clothing. The kids are dressed very nicely. He says, "Where did you get all this money from?" Because he probably expected to go begging, because there's no other way. He says, "Because the man, he told me he's going to pay me." So he goes to the man and he says to the man, "I want to pay you for all the expenses. I have money now." And the man says, "No, I refuse." He says, I did it willingly, so I refuse to get paid for the mitzvah." So the man says, "But you must take the money. I can't have you have supported my wife when I have the money. So they went to the rabbi, and the rabbi ruled in favor of the miser. That was one story. Another story, a man fainted in the street, and they tried to revive him. What happened was he had a pouch full of money, and it disappeared. Most likely it was either lost or stolen. And when the man heard that his money was gone, it was too much for him, and he fainted. And people were saying this man's life is in danger. And the miser was going by, and he heard the commotion, and when he heard what was going on, he says, I found the money. And he gave him all the money, and this became, people heard that this man gave the money. And the thief, who really stole the money, felt guilty, and he came to the miser, and he wanted to reimburse him. And the miser says, no, I did a mitzvah, and that's it. And again, the rabbi ruled in his favor. And the third case was someone came to the miser for a loan, and the miser said, who's going to guarantee it? And he says, God. He says, oh, if God's the guarantor, I'll give you the money. Well, a while later, the due date came, and the man didn't pay the loan. A few months later, he comes to the rich man, the miser, and he wants to give him the money. The man says, no, I'm not taking it. Why not? I borrowed, I have to give it to you. He says, you said God is the guarantor. Well, God paid me back. I made more money, and I have the money now. And again, they came to the rabbi, and the rabbi ruled in his favor. These are classic stories about Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, how he always saw the positive in everyone beyond most people's capability. Well, what's the logic over here? So if you look in the Tanya, which is the classic work of Chassidus, it says something very simple, it seems, but the way the Rebbe interprets it, it's a very profound saying. The Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe in the Tanya says, how do you know the challenges that this person has? This person who did things that were improper, how do you know what kind of upbringing he had? You don't know where he has to go to earn a living. He has to deal with people who are unscrupulous. And he's constantly being challenged. And he goes on and on describing the challenges that people have. So how could you judge that person when you don't even begin to appreciate the challenges that that person has? Now, while it's not an excuse for anyone to say, I have challenges, therefore I can do whatever I want, you have to look at that person and say, you perhaps would have fared even worse if you'd be in that person's shoes. So the Rebbe explains what the Tanya is really saying is that a person who has challenges, what does that mean? Two people grow up, same time, one has challenges, the other doesn't have. That means that the person who has the challenges was given by God greater resources to meet those challenges than the person who doesn't have the challenges. People who have fewer challenges do not have the same resources because they don't need it. They were not given those challenges, so they don't need the resources to meet the challenges. A person who is in such a bad environment and is so continually tested must be someone who has phenomenal internal energies and powers and potentials that the other person, the righteous person, doesn't have. So when you're judging someone favorably, it's not just because, oh, that person has a hard time, I shouldn't be too harsh on him. It means something much deeper than that. By you judging them favorably, what you are doing is helping that person elicit that potential to overcome the challenges. So if I see someone whose behavior is questionable, I'm not deluding myself into thinking that that person is a tzaddik, that person is a saint. See, because until now it sounds like we have to delude ourselves. We have to ignore the person's faults. And maybe sometimes we should, and that's the proper thing. But if we're in touch with reality, now we can't judge them favorably because that's not real. No, it is real because what this person has is the incredible potential to overcome the challenge, but for some reason they're not capable of accessing that potential. There's a blockage that doesn't let them dig deeper into their soul's resources, and by you judging them favorably, you are empowering them to access that positive energy so they could meet their challenges. So the reason we judge someone favorably is because deep down it is favorable. They do have, not only it's favorable, it's even better than what you have. They are superior to you who are not challenged. When you see someone who has a disability, a physical disability, so on one hand, we're very careful with the politically correct language, which happens to be a positive thing, that we don't call someone a cripple. We don't call someone handicapped even as much as we used to. What do we say? They're challenged. So what does that mean, they're challenged? So Chassidus explains that means that since God took away some abilities from them, some limited abilities, that means that God gave them superior spiritual energy to be able to cope with their disability. So in a certain sense, they are superior to the average person. They have superior potentials. Now, do they activate and actualize them? No, you can be physically disabled or mentally disabled or whatever type of disability and never bother to meet your challenge. But by people looking at them favorably, you empower them. That's what you do. Not looking down at them patronizingly, oh, you're a disabled, you're a cripple, I'm going to be nice to you, I'm going to call you nice names. No, that God forbid, that's not what it is. It's looking up to them, saying that you are unique, you have unique potentials that I don't have. When, a few years after the Yom Kippur War, a large group of Israelis who all suffered major injuries, loss of eyesight, loss of limbs, they came to the Rebbe. They had a choice to go different places. They came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe addressed them. And after the Rebbe addressed them, he went over to each one and gave them a blessing. And in his address, the Rebbe said, I don't like the way that they're referred to in Israel as the handicapped soldiers. It says the fact that God took away certain physical abilities means that he gave you superior spiritual abilities to cope with your challenges. So you should be called not in Hebrew it's nechei, the crippled or the injured soldiers, but you should be called mitzuyane tzahal, the distinguished soldiers, because you are special, not just because of your heroism in the war. That's one part of it. But there are heroes that didn't suffer any disabilities. But because of your disabilities, you have a greater challenge. That means you have greater potential. And by referring to it that way, in the positive way, you are helping them you're empowering them to access that potential and activate it. Just to supplement the idea that we don't know the other person's challenges, there's a very interesting story in the Talmud. If you go back to biblical history, the Jews were governed by kings. The worst king, probably, was Manasseh. Manasseh murdered his grandfather, the prophet Isaiah. He, among other people, he brought idol worship into Israel in unprecedented measures. He was the worst of the worst. And once one of the rabbis of the Talmud, Rav Ashi, who happened to be the editor of the Talmud, said something disparagingly about Manasseh in interpreting that biblical text. And in his dream, the king Manasseh comes to him and rebukes him for saying something disparaging about him, and challenges him and asks him a question on Jewish law that the rabbi couldn't answer. And Manasseh, this king, in the dream says, and how dare you refer to me disrespectfully when you don't know anything compared to what I know. So he says to the king Manasseh, then, if you're so smart and you knew so much Torah, how could you be so evil? and you worship so many idols. And he said, if you would have been around in my day and age, you would be running after idols to worship them. The pressure to worship idols in those days was something that we can't understand. It was such a desire for it. The pressures are so great. So the Talmud uses this as an example, again, how you never know, you never understand where the person is coming from. So when we say to judge the entire person, it doesn't just mean don't look at the bad, look at the good, which we said before, because then you're really saying just ignore the bad. No, here it means much more deeply. Look at the entire person means see that the person is essentially good and the person has tremendous potential, and you have to, by focusing on that good, it'll make that the overpowering and the more controlling aspect of their being. If you want, you could say that this is reflected in a Talmudic statement that the Jewish people in the Song of Songs are compared to a pomegranate. We are often compared to nuts and fruits. One of the fruits that we're compared to in a positive way is the pomegranate. We're compared to apples, we're compared to other fruits, but also to the pomegranate. Why the pomegranate? Because the pomegranate is filled with seeds. And the Talmud says that even the sinners of Israel are filled with seeds, filled with mitzvahs, the way a pomegranate is filled with seeds. There is a tradition that isn't authoritative, but there's an oral tradition that pomegranate has 613 seeds. Well, once I sat down with actually, it's my son. I did it once or twice, and it wasn't 613, but my son sat down with a doctor, so to make sure that it was honest, and they counted exactly 613. So I guess there are some that have 613 and some that don't. But whatever number of seeds, there are a lot of seeds in a pomegranate. And that's why we're compared to it, that even the sinners of Israel are filled with pomegranates. So the Rebbe once said, then if the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs, and if something is filled to the top, then where is there room for sins? So the Rebbe says, obviously, if you fill a cup with something and then you add more, it goes over the sides. That means the negative is on the outside. The positive is on the inside. By judging people favorably, what you're doing is you're focusing on the inside that then overflows and it gets rid of the outside negativity. So that's why judging people favorably is not just a device to promote peace, to maintain high standards, to get to get reward in the next life. It's all true, but the deeper reason is because that's really true, that the person is essentially meritorious, and you have to make it real by you giving the person the benefit of the doubt, looking for the positive. You know, the rabbi who is constantly focusing on seeing the positive in everyone and everything, no matter what happened, he was always focusing on the good and the positive, and he was hospitalized. And one day the nurse comes in and says, be positive. And he was shattered because he thought he was the model of positive energy. And here this nurse comes in and tells him to be positive. And he says to her, why did you tell me that? You know, I was smiling. She says, I was just telling you your blood type. Be positive. Now, the source of this statement, that you should judge everyone favorably, I said before, the author of it is Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya, but he also has two other teachings. The first teaching is, make for yourself a teacher. Second teaching, acquire for yourself a friend. And the third one is, judge everyone favorably. What's the connection between these three statements. So one interpretation the Rebbe gives, let's say you're talking to a person who has no redeeming value, at least superficially. You don't see the good in them. So of course you have to dig deeper and underneath the surface, but sometimes you have to be able to relate to the person's goodness on the surface level. So what could you do in defining not justification, but seeing the good in the person, or not focusing on the bad, is to blame it on the person's friends and their teachers. That's the challenge to teachers and friends. That sometimes, you know, there is this big debate, should we blame them or should we blame society? And Jewish law says both. Why does it have to be one or the other? It's both. If someone says it's society's fault that there are criminals, therefore we shouldn't punish criminals, it ignores the reality that the criminal has free choice and is responsible for his or her actions. But the person who just blames the criminal and forgets about society is creating an environment in which more criminal behavior will occur. You have to focus on both. It's not an excuse, but it is a reality that people sometimes grow up the way they do because of a lack of proper education. Their teachers were no good. Teachers could start with parents, and it ends with all teachers, or it could be their friends. So Rabbi Shua ben Prachi says you have to have a teacher, you have to have a good friend, and judge everyone favorably, because sometimes it's not really their fault, or it's not entirely their fault. Another interpretation is that people who don't judge others favorably could never have a teacher or a friend. It goes in the opposite direction. If you want to have a teacher, if you want to learn from someone, if you're going to look at every person and say, he's no good, I'm not going to learn from him or her. I'm not going to try to be a friend of that person because they're flawed. If you're going to look that way at everyone, you'll never have someone you could learn from, and you'll never have anyone to be a friend. Another reason given why a person should judge everyone favorably, because it facilitates humility. Actually, this is a statement that you can find in medieval works of Mussar, and it's reinforced in Hasidic literature. This idea that you judge everyone favorably has its limits. It stops at yourself. Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Always challenge yourself to say that, no, what I did was not necessarily right, was not sufficient or adequate. While the same thing that someone else does or doesn't do, you judge favorably. That fosters humility, because what you're doing is you're always seeing the good in the other, and you're always challenging yourself. Some people do it the other way around. They always give themselves the benefit of the doubt, but never the other person. And that's obviously not right. Igra de Kala is a Hasidic work, and he says it's a part of our emulating God. If God would not give us the benefit of the doubt, we probably would have been zapped a long time ago. We're so imperfect, and God allows us to get away with it. He is patient, he's tolerant. So we have to emulate God, so we also have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Some say that it's really more a statement about not stereotyping. When it says give everyone the benefit of the doubt, it means give everyone, the community, the benefit of the doubt, even if one member is a rotten apple. Don't judge the community, all of the people, because of the behavior of individuals. So that's not directed about individuals, directed about how we should not color the whole, the whole community with one brush. Tiferes Shlomo, I don't have it here, but Tiferes Shlomo is another Hasidic work. who says that sometimes, and this I think you referred to before, sometimes God says, I'm not going to judge a certain person, even though they did something wrong, until you pass judgment on that person. There's a story in the Talmud. Elijah the prophet was visiting a rabbi, and the rabbi asked him, what is God doing now? God is quoting various authorities, except for one rabbi. He doesn't quote Rabbi Meir. Why? Because Rabbi Meir was a disciple of Acher, a renegade rabbi who rebelled against Judaism, and Rabbi Meir continued to be his disciple. So Rabbah said, but Rabbi Meir was careful to only receive the good teachings. It's like he ate a fruit and he spit out the pit, but he ate the good stuff and rejected the bad stuff. As soon as he said that, Rabbah said to Elijah, and what is God doing now? God just started quoting Rabbi Meir. What does that story tell you? That when you say something positive about someone, you defend someone, God accepts that defense. Conversely, when you say something negative about someone, it could be God did not pass judgment and the verdict was still in abeyance. But as soon as you said the negative thing about that person, God says, okay, they judge the person unfavorably. I'm going to tell you, we have a few minutes. I'll tell you an incredible story that points to this idea. The third Chabad Rebbe, known as the Tzemach Tzedek, that's the name of one of his works. His name was the same as the Rebbe, who's his descendant, was once sitting amongst his Chassidim, and usually when he would be amongst the Chassidim, he would give a discourse, a Hasidic discourse, a very deep discourse of Hasidic teaching. But this time he said to the Chassidim, what would you rather hear from me, a discourse or a story? Well, when a Rebbe asks you a question like that, you have to be smart. And you're supposed to answer a story, of course. Because the discourse, he always says, that if he asks you about a story, why couldn't he just tell the story? That's also part of the story. He wanted the people to take the initiative. And this is the story. He said there was once a Jewish man, not too long ago, who rented an inn from another Jewish person, who in turn rented it from a Polish land nobleman. Now the Jew who actually ran the inn had a very bad season. It was bad weather, very few people frequented the inn, and he couldn't pay his rent. He was in arrears. And this went on 1 month after another. Finally, the manager, he wasn't the landlord, he was the manager, the Jewish manager, says to him, either you pay up or you're out. And he said, but I can't, I don't have the money. He says, I don't care, I waited, I gave you a full year, you didn't pay me anything, I have to pay the landowner, it's not my responsibility, you have to pay me the rent, or else you're out. Well, he didn't have any money, and he had no one to borrow it from, so he realized that the only way out of this would be to go to the Rebbe of this man. This man was a chassid of the Rizhiner Rebbe, Rabbi Israel of Rizhin. So he traveled to Rabbi Israel of Rizhin, and he said to him, your follower is trying to evict me. I have a family. We won't have a roof over our heads, and I just can't pay. Please, plead with him that he should let me stay a little longer. Sure enough, the Rebbe summons his chassid, his follower, and he tells him, you have to have compassion. This is a family. Give him another few months. Well, he was a loyal chassid, and he gave him another few months, but things didn't change. And again, he couldn't pay his rent. And this time he gives him an ultimatum, if you pay me the rent by this and this day, or else you're out. So again, he runs to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe again tells him, give him another few months, some compassion. And he follows obediently. But nothing changed. Those few months didn't bring any more money. And again, he gives him an ultimatum. Again, he runs to the Rebbe. The Rebbe tells him, give him an extension, and he doesn't. He says, look, I'll be thrown out of my job. I'm going to be fired as manager, and I won't have a roof over my head. And I gave you 2 extensions beyond the original extensions, and he evicted him. And, a few years later, he passed away. And his soul came before the heavenly tribunal. And he was basically a good person. His whole life was a pious man, a good person, charitable. But this one stain was really in his way, that he threw a family out of their home and caused that family to suffer. And that was this big blotch. And the verdict was that he has to go through serious purification and punishment. And then he did something I don't know if any other soul did before. He challenged the authority of the court. He says, who are the judges in the tribunal court? Angels. He says, do you angels know what it is to pay your rent to a nobleman, a Polish nobleman? And if you don't pay your rent, if you don't pay your dues, you'll be thrown into a dungeon to languish there with your family and die of starvation. He says, do you understand? You're angels. You have no understanding. I want to be judged by people. So they had no defense for that. So they bring in the souls of some of the great sages of hundreds of years before. And the souls listen to the whole argument, and again they rule against him. He says, I don't recognize their authority. It's hundreds of years since their souls inhabited the physical world. They don't remember what it's like to eke out a meager living. They are really unqualified. So the heavenly court decided he's right, and that it has to be souls that are in bodies, that understand the difficulty of earning a living. And the Tzemach Tzedek turns to the Hasidim, what do you think, guilty or innocent? And they all realized that they were the souls that were being asked to judge that person, and they said innocent. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, I agree, innocent. Now, very many people are not aware of what's going on in heavenly tribunals. This was a man who was in a higher sphere. But the point of the story is that sometimes God is asking us to be the judges. We are the judges. If we say something favorable, that gives God the ammunition, so to speak, to judge someone favorably. Because God puts everything in our hands. There's a biblical phrase that God put the world in our hands. We have the whole universe in our hands. We could mold it and shape it based on our own initiatives. So that's why we should never take our own words, our own actions lightly. We have tremendous power, immense power, to change the world and change other people's lives for the good. Saying good things helps other people. Saying negative things can harm them. And we hope that others understand that in relation to ourselves. We have another page over here. Let's conclude focusing a little bit on the differences between Chassidus and Mussar. We had a list of dozens of differences, but I want to focus on one or two. Mussar, and not just Mussar, but classical Judaism, focuses on our role in this world is to work here to earn something in the future. In Ethics of the Fathers, it says that this world is like a vestibule, an antechamber that leads to the palace. So in other words, our purpose in this world, as important as it is ultimately to reach a higher state of consciousness, which we do in the next world. Chassidus recognizes that there is a need for us to rise to higher levels of consciousness. But nevertheless, the focus is on creating a dwelling place for God in this world. Both statements can be found and traced back to the Talmudic rabbis. The authors of the Mussar quote the Talmud and Midrash, and so did the authors of Chassidus. There's no argument here. The question is, what is the ultimate focus? is the ultimate focus is on our own spiritual achievement, then the focus is still us. Then we are still egocentric in a positive way, that our ego is to become more and more spiritual and more godly. Chassidus says the focus should be on what does God want? What is his desire? His desire is to live in our world. And we create that ability by us doing the mitzvahs. So what is our focus? It's God-centric. We're thinking of what does God want, not what do I want, what is my greatest desire and need. And sure, if a person has a spiritual desire that's superior to someone who's a hedonist, whose desires are strictly physical and material, but it's still your desires. And if only the whole world only had spiritual desires, we'd have a very good world. But again, Chassidus adds a new dimension that the focus is fulfilling God's desire. God desired a dwelling in this world. We are the ones who facilitate that. And another pivotal difference relates to the way we look at ourselves. Mussar primarily, and this is true, again, classical Judaism, sees us as essentially flawed beings. Why shouldn't we be flawed? We're creations, we're creatures. We're not God, we're creations. And we try to focus on those flaws and remove them. And it ought to be that way. But Chassidus focuses on that we are essentially godly beings. It sees our virtues and our spirituality and our godliness as the essential identity of who we are, and that the flaws are superimposed. Whereas the Rebbe once answered to someone who spoke about Freud and how Freud views what motivates people, and the Rebbe says, Freud was not wrong. It's just if you dig in the earth, you'll find everything. You'll find dirt. If you dig deeper, you'll find a treasure. Freud, psychology in general, and to a certain extent, classical Judaism, recognizes the flaws that we have within us, because if you dig beneath the surface, you'll see how people may not be as righteous and as pious and as spiritual as they are on the surface. We have all sorts of flaws beneath the surface, conscious and subconscious. Chassidus says, but that's not digging deep enough. If we dig deep enough, we go to the core is good and holy and godly. And our challenge in life is to make the core go through all the different layers until it surfaces. And that the core, the outside, and the core and the outside are mirror images of one another. So, am I saying that one is right and one is wrong? No, God forbid. They're both valid approaches, and sometimes we need to use the Mussar approach. We have to see the flaws, because if we gloss over them, we might just repeat them over and over again and think we're great. But we cannot just be obsessed with those flaws. We have to recognize our true spiritual essence, which is pure and holy and godly. Any questions?
Why isn't Hasidus also considered classical Judaism, or why is it?
When I say classical, I'm talking historical. Everything, because Chassidus was, yes, the belief we have is that Chassidus and Mussar and all the other teachings of Judaism were all given to us by God on Mount Sinai. It was all implicit in the original communication of Mount Sinai. But everything the Midrash says has a time for it to be revealed. Just like there are inventions. The telephone came around in the 19th century. What happened centuries before that? There's a time for everything, King Solomon says. Things are revealed when it's the time for it to be revealed. So some teachings of Torah were kept secret or concealed from most people. And a time came and all of a sudden the floodgates were open and everyone could study it. And those floodgates are still closed. There's so much more knowledge that we still don't know yet that Mashiach will reveal to us. But so when I say classical Judaism, I'm referring to that which was revealed thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, as opposed to the teachings of Hasidus that were revealed primarily in the last 2 centuries. But I'm not separating it from Judaism, just from historical perspective, from that which was revealed before and that which is revealed later.
could be a danger that some people might think, okay, well, this is something new, it's not the original.
It's new in that it was newly revealed. It was not known or not understood or not focused on in the past. Same with Mussar, the same with before Maimonides was born, no one studied Maimonides. It doesn't mean that his teachings were not part of Torah, it just means they were not revealed. Yes?
Well, classically, we always believe that the world to come is a physical world, it's physical, correct?
Say that again?
The world to come is a physical world, it's this world.
No. When we say the world to come, there are two different, there's no dispute, there are two different interpretations of it, two different models. One is the world of the soul, detached from the body. When a person dies, their soul goes on into an afterlife. We call that the world to come because it comes after a person's life. And then there's another meaning of world to come, means the way the world will be in the future in the Messianic age, physically down here. They're not mutually exclusive terms. The only question is, which is a more important world to come, the world of the soul or the world where we're down here physically in a body? Maimonides believed that the world of the soul is superior to life down here, no matter how great it is. The Kabbalists, the mystics, and the Hasidic teachings favored the opinion that says, no, the ultimate goal is for the soul and body to coexist in this physical world in the Messianic age. Yes, Chassidus certainly focuses on that over the afterlife. It'll happen by hook or by crook. The question is, will the Messianic age happen because of us or in spite of us? The Talmud says Mashiach will come either if we're all good or all bad. What does that mean? It means that either Mashiach will have to save us from ourselves, or he'll have to give us what we earned. Are we going to get a handout, or are we going to deserve it? That's the difference. But it'll happen regardless. Doesn't depend on what we do. It depends on how we get it. Is it going to be through us or in spite of us? And I think, as a people, we deserve it. So it'll be because of us. But every individual has to find his or her place in that process. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.